Ambassador Kim Dae-ho walked slowly through the metal corridors of the space station floating high above Earth. The station was huge and shiny, made from materials that humans had never seen before. It belonged to Earth but was built with help from alien visitors who had come to their planet 3 months ago. The aliens called themselves the Nexari Coalition, and they were very powerful. They controlled many planets across the galaxy and had ships that could destroy entire worlds with just one shot. When they first contacted Earth, everyone was scared but also excited. It was the first time humans had met beings from other planets. Dae-ho stopped at a large window and looked out at the stars. He was 40 years old and had been a diplomat. For most of his adult life, he had helped solve problems between different countries on Earth, but this was much bigger than anything he had ever done before. The fate of all humanity might depend on how well he could talk to these alien visitors. Captain Lee So-min stood beside him, looking worried. She was in charge of protecting the diplomatic team, and she did not trust the aliens at all. Her soldiers were stationed around the space station, but their weapons seemed like toys compared to what the Nexari had. She had read all the reports about alien technology, and it made her feel helpless. 3 months ago, the Nexari had sent a message to Earth through some kind of advanced communication system that human scientists barely understood. The message was polite, but everyone could hear the threat hidden in the words. They said they wanted to meet with Earth leaders to discuss humanity's future in what they called the Galactic Order. Dr. Park Won-ho was the third member of the diplomatic team. He was a scientist who studied how different kinds of minds worked. He had spent weeks trying to understand how the Nexari thought and what they wanted. The more he learned, the more worried he became. These aliens had met many other species before, and none of those meetings had ended well. The Nexari had a pattern they followed when they found new planets. First they would make contact and seem friendly. Then they would offer to let the new species join their coalition, but it was not really a choice. Every species that said no simply disappeared from the galaxy. No one knew exactly what happened to them, but their planets became empty and silent. Dea turned away from the window and walked toward the meeting room where they would soon face the alien delegation. He carried a small device in his pocket that looked like a simple translation computer, but it was actually much more advanced than that. It was designed to record everything about the aliens, their technology, their biology, and how they behaved. The device was one of many secrets that Earth was hiding from the Nexari. For months, human scientists and military leaders had been preparing for this meeting. They knew it would not be a real negotiation. The aliens would demand surrender, and humans would have to find a way to survive. Captain So-min followed Dae-ho down the corridor, checking her weapon for the 10th time that day. She knew it would be useless against alien technology, but it made her feel better to have it. The report said that Nexari energy shields could stop any human weapon, and their own guns could cut through any armor that Earth could make. The meeting room was at the center of the space station. It was round with a high ceiling and walls covered in symbols from many different alien civilizations. Most of these symbols represented species that had been conquered by the Nexari and absorbed into their coalition. It was meant to be intimidating, and it worked. Dr. Won-ho sat down at the human side of the table and opened his notebook. He pretended to be reviewing his notes, but actually he was activating hidden sensors built into his clothes. These sensors would analyze everything about the aliens, from their body temperature to the way they moved. Every piece of information would be sent back to Earth immediately. The waiting was the hardest part. Dae-ho had been in many tense negotiations before, but this was different. If he failed today, it would not just mean a bad trade deal or a broken treaty. It would mean the end of human independence, and maybe the end of humanity itself. Captain So-min positioned herself where she could see all the entrances to the room. Her team was scattered throughout the space station, ready to protect the diplomatic team if things went wrong. But she knew that if the aliens wanted to attack, there would be very little her soldiers could do to stop them. Door opened, and the Nexari delegation entered the room. Dae-ho felt his heart beating faster as he got his first close look at the aliens who might decide his species' fate. They were tall and covered in scales that reflected the light like mirrors. Each one had 4 arms and eyes that seemed to look right through him. General Vexthal was the leader of the alien delegation. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never been defeated. His scales were darker than the others, and he wore what looked like a military uniform covered in symbols that probably represented his victories behind. The general came 12 other aliens, each one representing a different species that had been absorbed into the Nexari coalition. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange that Deho had trouble understanding how they could even exist. But they all had one thing in common: they looked at the humans like they were looking at insects. Dr. Wanho made notes about each alien while his hidden sensors worked. He could see that they were all armed with weapons that his equipment could not identify. The technology was so advanced that human instruments could barely detect it. This was exactly what Earth military had expected, but it was still frightening to see. General sat down across from Deho and activated a translation device that allowed them to understand each other. His voice was deep and seemed to come from everywhere at once. When he spoke, it was with the tone of someone who was used to being obeyed. Without question, welcome humans to your first official contact. With the Nexari Coalition, we represent the dominant power in this galaxy, and we have come to offer you a choice. Your species can join us willingly and benefit from our protection, or you can resist and face the consequences that all resistant species eventually face. Deho felt the weight of those words. The choice was not really a choice at all. It was surrender or die, but he had to play his part and act like this was a real negotiation. He needed to buy time for Earth to prepare its defenses, even though he knew that conventional weapons would be useless against such advanced technology. The ambassador took a deep breath and began to speak, knowing that every word might determine whether humanity would survive the next few days. The game had begun, and Earth was playing for the highest stakes possible: the right to exist as a free species in a galaxy that seemed to have no place for freedom. General Vexthal leaned back in his chair and looked at the three humans sitting across from him with obvious contempt. He had done this same meeting dozens of times before with different species, and it always ended the same way. The primitives would try to negotiate, then they would realize they had no choice, and finally they would surrender. The general activated a holographic display that showed the space around Earth. Hundreds of Nexari warships floated in perfect formation, each one capable of destroying entire cities with a single weapon blast. The message was clear: resistance was pointless because the aliens had overwhelming power. Ambassador Deho stared at the display and felt his stomach drop. The ships were massive and sleek, covered in energy shields that shimmered like soap bubbles. Each vessel was easily 10 times larger than anything humans had ever built, and the weapons they carried looked like they could crack planets, and half your species has exactly 6 hours to make your decision, said General Vexthal through his translation device. You can join the Nexari Coalition as a vassal state and provide us with resources and military service in exchange for protection, or you can choose to resist and face immediate conquest. The choice is yours, but I recommend you choose Wesley Dr. Park. Wanho pretended to take notes while his hidden sensors recorded everything about the alien technology. The energy readings were incredible, far beyond anything human science had thought possible, but he also noticed something interesting. The aliens seemed very confident, almost too confident, as if they had never faced real resistance before. Captain Lee Soman watched the alien guards positioned around the room and calculated her chances of protecting the diplomatic team if things went wrong. The odds were not good, but she had been in impossible situations before. The key was to stay calm and look for opportunities that others might miss. The general continued his presentation, showing images of other planets that had joined the coalition. Some looked prosperous and peaceful, while others appeared to be strip-mined for resources. The message was clear: cooperation brought rewards, while resistance brought destruction. Dea asked for permission to contact Earth leadership to discuss the terms. This was all part of the plan. He needed to buy time for humanity to prepare their defenses. The general agreed, but warned that any delay would be seen as a sign of defiance. What the aliens did not know was that Earth had been preparing for this moment since the first contact 3 months ago. Human military leaders had studied every piece of information they could gather about the Nexari and their tactics. The patterns were always the same: overwhelming force followed by quick surrender. While Deho pretended to communicate with Earth Captain Soman noticed that the alien guards were becoming more relaxed. They clearly thought the meeting was going according to plan and that humans would surrender like all the others before them, this overconfidence might be their weakness. Darwanho made a disturbing discovery as he analyzed the alien technology. The Nexari were not just conquerors. They were collectors. They absorbed other species into their coalition and used their knowledge and resources to become even more powerful. Each conquest made them stronger and more dangerous. The 6-hour deadline was clearly meant to prevent any real discussion or planning. The aliens wanted a quick decision before humans could organize any kind of resistance. It was psychological warfare designed to make surrender seem like the only rational choice, but Earth had already made its decision. Months ago, when the first alien message arrived, human leaders had looked at the historical patterns and realized that the Nexari never kept their promises. Species that joined willingly were eventually enslaved or eliminated once their usefulness ended. General Vexthal grew impatient. As the hours passed, he had expected the humans to surrender within the first hour like most primitive species. Instead, they kept asking questions and requesting more time to consider their options. This was unusual, and it made him suspicious. The alien delegation began to show signs of irritation when Deho asked about the specific terms of vassalage. The general made it clear that vassal species had no rights and existed only to serve the coalition. Their planet's resources would be harvested, their populations relocated as needed, and their military forces absorbed into the Nexari fleet. Dr. Wanho realized that this was not just conquest, it was complete cultural extinction. The Nexari did not want allies, they wanted slaves and resources. Everything that made a species unique would be erased and replaced with Nexari systems and values. Captain Soman noticed that the alien guards were positioning themselves differently as the meeting continued. They were subtle about it, but she could see they were preparing for something. She quietly signaled her own team to be ready for trouble. As the 6-hour deadline approached, General Vexthal became more threatening. He reminded the humans that their primitive weapons were useless against Nexari technology and that their small fleet could be destroyed in minutes. The only logical choice was surrender. Ambassador Deho finally delivered his answer after consulting with his team one final time. He stood up and looked directly at the general, then spoke words that would change everything. Earth respectfully declines your offer. We choose to remain an independent species. The silence that followed was deafening. General Vexthal stared at the human diplomat as if he could not believe what he had heard. No species had ever refused the coalition offer and survived to tell about it. The general face showed confusion, then anger, then something that might have been respect. You have made a grave mistake, human, said the general, rising from his chair. Your species will be conquered and absorbed whether you agree or not. The only difference is how much you will suffer before you submit. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. Hidden weapon systems emerged from the walls of the space station, targeting the human delegation with energy nets designed to capture rather than kill. The Nexari wanted prisoners to interrogate about Earth defenses. Captain Soman drew her weapon, but the alien energy net hit her before she could fire. The net wrapped around her body like liquid lightning, paralyzing her nervous system and sending waves of pain through every muscle. She collapsed to the floor, unable to move or speak. Dr. Wanho tried to activate an emergency beacon, but another energy net caught him mid-motion. The alien technology was incredibly precise, designed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage. The Nexari had perfected these techniques over centuries of conquest. Ambassador Deho felt the energy net wrap around him like fire in his veins. As consciousness faded, he managed to whisper a single word into his hidden communicator device to the aliens. It sounded like a cry of pain, but it was actually a code word that would activate Earth's most secret defense systems. The last thing Deho saw before darkness took him was General Vexthal standing over him with a satisfied expression. The alien leader believed he had won, that humanity would soon join the long list of conquered species, but he had no idea what he had just unleashed. Earth had received the activation signal, and across the planet military commanders were implementing plans that had been prepared for exactly this scenario. The Nexari had made their choice, and now they would discover what happened when you attacked a species that had survived ice ages, world wars, and nuclear weapons. The game was about to change in ways that would shock the entire galaxy. The holding cells deep inside the space station were designed to break the spirit of any prisoner. The walls were made of some kind of metal that seemed to absorb light and hope, leaving only cold gray surfaces that reflected nothing the air was. Thick and hard to breathe, making every moment feel like a struggle. Ambassador Deho woke up, strapped to a chair with wires attached to his head. The pain from the energy net still coursed through his body, but he forced himself to stay alert. He could hear Dr. Wanho groaning in the next cell and Captain Soman cursing quietly in the cell. Beyond that, at least they were all still alive. General Vexthal entered the interrogation chamber accompanied by a tall alien with 6 arms and eyes that glowed like red coals. This was clearly some kind of specialist, probably an expert in extracting information from unwilling subjects. The general looked pleased with himself, as if he had already won. The interrogation began with simple questions about Earth military capabilities and defensive systems. When Deho refused to answer, the specialist activated a device that sent waves of agony through his nervous system. The pain was incredible, but the ambassador had prepared for this. What the aliens did not know was that human military had spent months training their diplomats to resist interrogation techniques. The same species that had survived torture during world wars had developed methods to protect their secrets even under the most extreme conditions. Dr. Wanho was brought into the chamber next, and the aliens tried a different approach. They used some kind of neural probe that was supposed to read memories directly from his brain, but human brain patterns were different from other species, and the probe could not make sense of what it found. Specialists became frustrated as none of their standard techniques worked on the humans. These prisoners were more resistant than any species they had encountered before. Their minds seemed to operate on completely different principles that alien technology could not easily penetrate. Captain Salman was the most defiant of the 3 prisoners. When they brought her in, she immediately began analyzing the chamber, looking for weaknesses in the alien security systems. Even strapped to a chair and surrounded by advanced technology, she was still thinking like a soldier. General Vexthal grew angry as the interrogation continued for hours without results. He had expected to extract complete information about Earth defenses within minutes. Instead, the humans seemed to be getting stronger and more defiant as time passed. Meanwhile, on Earth, the activation signal that Deho had sent was causing dramatic changes across the planet. Military bases that had looked abandoned for decades suddenly came to life. Satellite systems that appeared to be simple communication devices, extended weapon arrays that had been hidden for years. Admiral Cho Yuna stood in the command center, buried deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, watching as Earth's true defensive capabilities were revealed for the first time. The facility looked like something from a science fiction movie, with holographic displays showing the entire solar system. The transformation was incredible. What the Nexari had seen as primitive orbital platforms were actually sophisticated weapon systems designed to look harmless. Communication satellites deployed shield generators that could protect entire continents. Space stations that seemed to be glorified research facilities revealed massive gun batteries. Lieutenant Colonel Behana commanded the hidden fleet that had been disguised as space junk floating in Earth orbit. For years, these ships had pretended to be derelict hulks left over from humanity's early space exploration attempts. But they were actually the most advanced vessels humans had ever built. The Nexari fleet surrounding Earth began to detect the changes in human defensive posture. Their sensors registered energy signatures that had not been there before, but they dismissed most of them as desperate attempts to appear stronger than they really were. What they could not understand was that humans had spent their entire history fighting each other and learning from every defeat. Every war, every battle, every strategic disaster had taught them something new about survival and resistance. Dr. Yunminji worked frantically in her laboratory beneath Seoul, coordinating the technical aspects of Earth defense. Her team had developed weapons based on theoretical physics that most alien species considered impossible. They were about to find out if their theories actually worked. The key to human defensive strategy was unpredictability. The Nexari had conquered dozens of species using the same tactics over and over again. They expected their enemies to fight conventionally, using energy weapons and shield technology that they could easily counter, but humans had never been conventional. They had survived ice ages by adapting to impossible conditions. They had won wars by using tactics that their enemies could not predict. They had built civilizations by cooperating in ways that seemed illogical to other species back in the interrogation chamber. General Vexthal was becoming desperate. None of his techniques were working on the human prisoners, and his fleet commanders were reporting strange energy readings from Earth. The situation was not going according to plan. Ambassador Deho smiled despite the pain coursing through his body. He knew that his sacrifice had bought Earth the time it needed to prepare. The activation signal had been received, and humanity was about to show these aliens what happened when you attacked a species that refused to surrender. Dr. Wanho had managed to plant a virus in the alien computer system during his interrogation. The neural probe worked both ways, and while it was trying to read his memories, he was learning about their technology. Human brain patterns were so different from alien ones that the virus spread like wildfire. Captain Soman noticed that the alien guards were becoming nervous. Something was happening that they had not expected. Their confident demeanor was cracking. As reports came in from their fleet commanders about unusual activity around Earth, the interrogation chamber suddenly went dark as the station power systems fluctuated. The virus that Dr. Wanho had planted was spreading through the alien network, causing system failures throughout the facility. Emergency lighting came on, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. General Vexthal received an urgent communication from his fleet admiral. The human planet was doing something impossible. Their defensive systems were activating in ways that defied everything the Nexari knew about primitive technology. The admiral voice was filled with confusion and growing alarm. The humans had weapons that their sensors could not properly identify. Energy signatures that made no sense according to known physics. Defensive systems that seemed to operate on principles that had never been seen before. For the first time in his long career, General Vexthal felt a cold fear creeping up his spine. He had conquered 47 different worlds and never encountered anything like this. The humans were not behaving like any species he had ever faced. Ambassador Deho looked up at the general and spoke in a voice that was calm despite everything he had endured. You made a mistake attacking us. Now you are going to learn why humanity has survived everything the universe has thrown at us. The general stared at the human diplomat and for the first time began to wonder if he had made a terrible error in judgment. The reports from his fleet were becoming more urgent and more confused. Something was very wrong, and he was starting to realize that he might have underestimated these strange creatures outside the space station. Earth was preparing to demonstrate why attacking humanity was the worst mistake the Nexari had ever made. The transformation of Earth defensive systems was like watching a planet wake up from a long sleep. What had looked like ordinary satellites and space stations suddenly revealed their true nature as the most advanced weapons humanity had ever created. The disguise had been perfect for years. Admiral Cho Yuna watched the tactical displays in her underground command center as reports came in from around the solar system. Human ships that had been pretending to be space debris were powering up their engines and revealing weapon systems that defied conventional understanding. The Nexari fleet found themselves surrounded by defenses that had appeared out of nowhere. Their long-range sensors had completely missed the true nature of human orbital infrastructure. Every piece of space junk, every abandoned satellite, every derelict station was potentially a weapon waiting to strike. Lieutenant Colonel Behana commanded the first wave of the counterattack from her flagship, a massive vessel that had been disguised as a broken-down space station for over 10 years. The Nexari had ignored it completely, assuming it was just another piece of human garbage cluttering up their solar system. The battle began with humanity demonstrating their most closely guarded secret. Their weapons did not work like anything the Nexari had ever encountered. Instead of energy beams and plasma cannons, human technology used the laws of physics themselves as weapons. The first human weapon to fire was something the scientists called a gravity bomb. It did not explode like conventional weapons. Instead, it created a localized gravitational field that was thousands of times stronger than normal. The effect on the Nexari ships was immediate and devastating. 3 alien cruisers that had been maintaining perfect formation suddenly found themselves being pulled together by artificial gravity. The ship's hulls, which were designed to withstand energy weapons and kinetic impacts, could not resist the fundamental force that held the universe together. Dr. Yun Minji watched from her laboratory as her theoretical weapons performed exactly as calculated. The gravity bombs created gravitational anomalies that crushed the alien vessels like tin cans. The same force that kept planets in orbit around stars was now being used to destroy enemy ships. The second wave of human weapons was even more terrifying. These were called dimensional rifts, and they worked by opening holes in space-time itself. The rifts appeared inside the Nexari ships, exposing their crews to the vacuum of space in ways that their technology could not prevent. The alien fleet commanders had never seen anything like this. Their shields were designed to stop energy weapons and deflect physical projectiles, but they provided no protection against weapons that operated by changing the fundamental nature of space itself. Admiral Vexkol, the Nexari fleet commander, tried to organize a counterattack, but his ships were being destroyed faster than he could give orders. The human weapons ignored every defensive system his species had developed over centuries of conquest. The third type of human weapon was perhaps the most disturbing. It was called a quantum disruptor, and it worked by interfering with the quantum fields that held matter together. At the subatomic level, the weapon caused the very atoms in alien ships to forget how to stick together. Nexari vessels that had survived the gravity bombs and dimensional rifts simply began to dissolve as their molecular structure became unstable. The process was slow enough that the crews could watch their ships literally falling apart around them, atom by atom. Back on the space station, General Vextel was receiving increasingly desperate reports from his fleet. The humans had somehow developed weapons that operated outside known physics. Every tactical manual, every strategic doctrine, every piece of military wisdom the Nexari had accumulated was useless. The virus that Dr. Wanho had planted in the alien computer system was spreading throughout the station, causing critical system failures. The facility life support was fluctuating, the artificial gravity was becoming unstable, and the weapon systems were turning against their own crew's ambassador. Deho felt the restraints on his chair suddenly release as the alien security systems malfunctioned. The virus was designed to recognize human biological signatures and free any prisoners. While keeping the aliens trapped, he stood up slowly, testing his strength. Captain Soman broke free from her cell and immediately began searching for weapons. The alien guards were too busy dealing with system failures to stop her. She found an energy rifle that one of them had dropped and quickly figured out how to use it. Dr. Wanho emerged from his cell with a satisfied smile on his face. The virus he had planted was working perfectly, turning the alien technology against its creators. The same neural probe that had tried to read his memories had become the delivery system for humanity counterattack. The three humans fought their way through the station corridors as the alien crew struggled to maintain control of their own facility. The virus had infected every system, turning the advanced technology into a liability rather than an advantage. General Vexthal tried to coordinate the defense of the station, but his own computers were working against him. Every order he gave was corrupted by the virus. Every system he tried to use turned against him. The humans had somehow turned his greatest strength into his greatest weakness. The rescue came not from outside but from within as the station-owned systems began helping the human prisoners. Doors opened automatically to provide escape routes while sealing off areas where alien guards might be hiding. The facility artificial intelligence had been compromised and was now working for humanity. Lieutenant Colonel Behana coordinated the final phase of the space battle as the last Nexari ships tried to retreat. But the human weapons had created gravitational anomalies throughout the system, making faster than light travel impossible. The aliens were trapped. The quantum disruptors had an unexpected side effect. They created a field that prevented the Nexari ships from entering hyperspace. Their escape route was cut off, and they were forced to face the full power of human defensive systems. Admiral Cho Yuna watched the battle displays with grim satisfaction as the alien fleet was systematically destroyed. The same species that had conquered dozens of worlds was being defeated by weapons they could not understand or counter. The gravity bombs continued to crush ship after ship, while dimensional rifts opened inside command centers and engineering sections. The quantum disruptors dissolved the most advanced vessels in the fleet, leaving only empty space, where proud warships had once been. Back on the station, Ambassador Deho, Captain Soman, and Dr. Wanho reached the docking bay where their rescue ship was waiting. The facility was in chaos with alien crew members running through corridors trying to escape the spreading system. Failures General Vexthal watched helplessly. As his prisoners escaped and his fleet was destroyed, the humans had turned his moment of triumph into a complete disaster. Everything he had believed about his species' superiority was crumbling around him. The battle for Earth was over before it had really begun. The Nexari fleet that had come to conquer humanity was now nothing but debris floating in space. The aliens had learned too late that some species were more dangerous than they appeared as the human diplomatic team prepared to leave the station. Ambassador Deho looked back at General Vexthal and spoke words that would haunt the alien commander for the rest of his life. You should have chosen peace now. You know what happens when you attack humanity. The rescue ship departed the station carrying the 3 humans back to Earth, while behind them the greatest fleet in Nexari history continued to dissolve into cosmic dust. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity was not prey. The news of the Nexari fleet destruction spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Species that had lived in fear of the Coalition for centuries suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about power and survival. The impossible had happened on the ancient space station. General Vexthal stood alone in the command center, watching the last of his ships disappear into quantum dissolution. The screen showed empty space where moments before the most powerful fleet in the galaxy had been preparing to conquer yet another world. The general had lost everything in a single battle, not to superior technology or greater numbers, but to weapons that should not have been possible according to everything the Nexari knew about physics. The humans had somehow turned the universe itself into a weapon. Ambassador Deho returned to Earth as a hero, but he felt no joy in the victory. The destruction of the Nexari fleet had been necessary, but it represented the failure of diplomacy. The human species had been forced to reveal their true capabilities. To survive, Dr. Wanho spent weeks analyzing the data collected during the battle. The human weapons had performed even better than expected, but their success raised troubling questions about what other species might be capable of if pushed to their limits. Captain Soman was promoted to admiral and given command of Earth New Space Defense Force. The battle had shown that humanity could defend itself, but it had also revealed their location to every hostile species in the galaxy. The survivors of the Nexari fleet were few, but their testimony spread throughout the galactic community like wildfire. They spoke of weapons that ignored shields and armor, of ships that dissolved at the molecular level, and of humans who fought with a desperation that bordered on madness. The psychological impact of the defeat was more devastating than the physical destruction the Nexari had built their empire on. The belief that their technology made them invincible. Now every species under their control knew that invincibility was an illusion. Other Coalition members began to question their loyalty to a power that could be so completely defeated by a species they had never heard of before. Rebellion broke out on a dozen worlds as subject species saw their chance for freedom. The Nexari government tried to suppress the news of their defeat, but it was impossible to hide the loss of their entire expeditionary fleet. The political consequences were immediate and severe as rival factions within the coalition began to position themselves for power. General Vexthal was recalled to the Nexari homeworld to face trial for his failure. The charges included incompetence, cowardice, and bringing shame upon the coalition. He knew that his career was over, but he also knew that he had learned something important about the nature of power. During his trial, the general tried to explain what had happened, but his testimony was dismissed as the ravings of a defeated commander. The Nexari leadership could not accept that their superior technology had been useless against human weapons. The truth was that the Nexari had never faced a species like humanity before. Most civilizations developed along predictable paths, focusing on either technology or biology or psychology. But humans had developed all 3 simultaneously, creating something unprecedented. Dr. Yun Minji published her research on the quantum weapons that had destroyed the Nexari fleet, but she kept the most important discoveries classified. The human government wanted to maintain their strategic advantage in case other hostile species appeared. The weapons themselves were just the beginning of what made humanity dangerous. The real advantage was their ability to think outside conventional parameters, to see possibilities that other species missed. The battle had demonstrated that human creativity was their greatest weapon when faced with impossible odds. They did not surrender or despair. Instead, they found new ways to fight that their enemies could not predict or counter. Admiral Cho Yuna established the Human Defense Protocol, a comprehensive plan for protecting Earth from future alien threats. The protocol included not just military preparations, but diplomatic and psychological strategies as well. Galactic community was forced to recognize that a new power had emerged in their midst. Humanity had gone from unknown primitives to a species that commanded respect and fear in the span of a single day. Species that had been planning their own expansion into human space quietly canceled their plans. The demonstration of human defensive capabilities had sent a clear message that Earth was not available for conquest. Ancient space station where the diplomatic meeting had taken place became a symbol of the changing galactic order. The facility was abandoned by the Nexari and eventually claimed by a coalition of smaller species who had been freed from alien rule. Ambassador Deho was invited to speak at the Galactic Council, a body that had previously ignored humanity's existence. His speech was simple and direct. Earth wanted peace but would defend itself against any threat regardless of the odds. The message resonated throughout the galaxy, not just because of the words, but because of the demonstration that had preceded them. Humanity had proven that they could back up their diplomacy with force, if necessary. Dr. Wanho established the Institute for Xenological Studies, dedicated to understanding how different species thought and behaved. The goal was to prevent future conflicts through better communication and mutual understanding. The virus he had planted in the Nexari computer system became a template for future defensive measures. Human programmers developed digital weapons that could turn any sufficiently advanced technology against its creators. Captain Soman, now Admiral Soman, began training a new generation of space officers in the lessons learned from the Nexari battle. The key was to never underestimate an enemy, but also to never accept defeat as inevitable. The human space program expanded rapidly as governments around the world invested in defensive capabilities. The same species that had once fought each other over resources now worked together to protect their common home. The Nexari coalition began to fracture as member species declared independence and formed their own governments. The empire that had dominated the galaxy for centuries was coming apart at the seams. General Vexthal was sentenced to exile on a remote planet where he would have time to contemplate his failures. The sentence was considered lenient by Nexari standards, but the general knew that his life was effectively over. On his exile planet, the former general had access to all the reports about the battle that had destroyed his fleet. He spent his days analyzing the human weapons, trying to understand how such impossible technology could exist. More he studied, the more he realized that the Nexari had made a fundamental error in their approach to conquest. They had assumed that all species would follow similar patterns of development, but humans were different. Humanity had evolved under conditions that forced them to be adaptable, creative, and resilient. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and natural disasters by finding new solutions to impossible problems. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity was not just another species to be conquered or absorbed. They were something new and potentially revolutionary in the way they approached survival and conflict. Word spread from world to world about the species that had defeated the Nexari using weapons that should not have been possible. The story grew with each telling until humans became legendary figures in galactic folklore. The battle had lasted only a few hours, but its consequences would shape the galaxy for generations to come. The old order, based on technological superiority and military conquest, was giving way to something new. Humanity had proven that intelligence, creativity, and determination could overcome any advantage that technology alone could provide. The lesson was not lost on other species, who began to reconsider their own approaches to survival and development. 5 years after the battle that destroyed the Nexari fleet, the galaxy had transformed into something completely different. The old order, based on conquest and technological superiority, had given way to a new era of cooperation and mutual respect. Ambassador Deho stood before the newly formed Galactic Assembly, addressing representatives from over 200 species. Many of these civilizations had been slaves under the Nexari coalition, but now they were free to determine their own destinies. The assembly met on a neutral world called Haven Prima Planet that had been devastated by the Nexari, but was now being rebuilt with help from dozens of species working together. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. Dr. Wonho had become the galaxy leading expert on interspecies communication. His research had helped establish protocols that prevented the kinds of misunderstandings that had led to the Nexari conflict. The Institute for Xenological Studies that he had founded was now a galactic institution. With branches on hundreds of worlds, species from across the galaxy sent their brightest minds to learn about peaceful coexistence. Captain Soman now held the rank of Fleet Admiral and commanded the Human Defense Force organization that had evolved. From purely defensive to something more complex, they still protected Earth, but they also helped other species defend themselves. The quantum weapons that had destroyed the Nexari fleet remained humanity's most closely guarded secret, but the knowledge that such weapons existed had changed the nature of galactic politics forever. No species was willing to risk the kind of complete annihilation that the Nexari had suffered. The mere possibility that other civilizations might have similar weapons hidden away had made everyone more cautious about starting conflicts. Dr. Yun Minji had established a research station in the asteroid belt where human scientists worked alongside alien researchers to develop peaceful applications of quantum technology. The weapons of war were being transformed into tools of exploration and construction. The space station where the diplomatic meeting had taken place had been converted into a memorial and museum. Visitors from across the galaxy came to learn about the day when everything changed. General Vexthal had died in exile on his remote planet, but his final reports had been discovered by researchers studying the battle. The former Nexari commander had spent his last years trying to understand what had made humanity so dangerous. His conclusion was simple but profound. Humans were dangerous not because of their technology, but because of their refusal to accept defeat. They saw impossible situations as challenges to be overcome rather than reasons to surrender. The Nexari coalition had officially dissolved 3 years after the battle, with its former territories becoming independent or joining new voluntary alliances. The galaxy had learned that empires built on fear and conquest were ultimately unstable. Ambassador Deho reflected on the changes as he prepared to deliver his speech to the assembly. The attack on the human diplomatic mission had been intended to demonstrate Nexari power. Instead, it had revealed their weakness. The speech itself was brief and to the point. Deho spoke about the importance of treating all species with respect and dignity. Regardless of their technological level or military power, he reminded the assembly that strength came from cooperation, not domination. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Representatives from dozens of species rose to pledge their support for the principles that Earth had fought to defend. The galaxy was choosing a different path than the one the Nexari had tried to force. Upon it, Dr. Wonho watched the proceedings from the observation gallery and marveled at how much had changed. The species that had once lived in fear of alien conquest were now working together to build something better. The Human Defense Protocol that Admiral Soman had established was being adopted by other species who recognized that defensive cooperation was more effective than individual military buildup. Quantum Research Station was producing discoveries that benefited everyone. Involved. The same principles that had created weapons of mass destruction were now being used to develop faster-than-light communication and transportation systems. The Memorial Museum on the ancient space station had become a pilgrimage site for species that had been freed from Nexari rule. They came to remember the day when one species had stood up to the galaxy's most powerful empire and won. The exhibits included recordings of the battle holo projections of the quantum weapons in action and testimonies from survivors on both sides. The goal was not to glorify war, but to remind visitors of the price of freedom. General Vexthal personal logs were among the most visited exhibits. His gradual realization that the Nexari had underestimated humanity provided insight into how empires could blind themselves to their own weaknesses. The former general had written extensively about the human concept of fighting against impossible odds. He had concluded that this was what made them so dangerous. They simply did not know when to quit. Ambassador Deho had established the Earth Embassy on Haven Prime, where representatives from across the galaxy came to learn about human culture and values. The embassy had become a center for diplomatic innovation. Building itself was designed to accommodate species with vastly different environmental needs. It had sections with different atmospheres, gravity levels, and lighting conditions so that everyone could feel comfortable. Dr. Wanho regular lectures at the embassy were always packed with beings eager to understand how humans thought and communicated. His research had shown that effective communication required understanding not just language but the entire cultural context. Admiral Solman had transformed the Human Defense Force into something that resembled a galactic peacekeeping organization. They still protected Earth, but they also responded to requests for help from other species facing threats. The Force had developed new technologies that could disable rather than destroy enemy vessels. The goal was to end conflicts quickly without the massive casualties that had characterized the Nexari battle. The quantum weapons remained in storage on Earth, protected by multiple layers of security and authorization protocols. The human government had decided that such devastating weapons should only be used as a last resort. The galaxy had learned to respect humanity not because of their weapons but because of their principles. They had proven that power without wisdom was ultimately self-destructive. Species that had once planned to conquer or absorb other civilizations now sought to understand and cooperate with them. The example set by humanity had changed the fundamental nature of galactic politics. The Galactic Assembly had established the Deho Accords, named after the ambassador who had refused to surrender to the Nexari. The Accords guaranteed the rights of all species to self-determination and prohibited forced annexation. Dr. Yunminji research into quantum physics had opened up new possibilities for space travel and communication. The galaxy was becoming smaller and more connected as species learned to work together. The asteroid research station had become a symbol of what was possible when different species combined their knowledge and resources. The discoveries being made there benefited everyone involved. The human embassy on Haven Prime had spawned similar institutions throughout the galaxy. Species were learning that diplomacy and cultural exchange were more effective than military conquest. Ambassador Deho concluded his speech to the assembly with a simple message. The galaxy had learned that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to build and protect. The standing ovation that followed lasted for several minutes. Representatives from species that had never worked together before were now planning joint missions and cultural exchanges. The attack on a human Diplomat had been intended to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Instead, it had sparked a revolution in how species related to each other across the galaxy. The Nexari had attacked humanity, expecting quick surrender. Instead, they had awakened something that would transform the galaxy forever. The lesson was clear. Some mistakes truly cannot be undone. 5 years later, the galaxy was a better place not because of the weapons that had destroyed the Nexari fleet, but because of the principles that humanity had fought to defend. The story of the diplomatic mission that had changed everything was taught in schools. Across hundreds of worlds, children learned that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. The galaxy had learned that true power came not from the ability to conquer, but from the wisdom to inspire others to be better than they thought possible. Humanity had proven that some things were worth fighting for, and that some fights were worth winning no matter the